Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in Exodus chapter 18. There's some wisdom that's going to come out of this chapter here about leadership that is a great takeaway, especially from you pastors, right? Pastors of churches, and as your churches begin to grow. And I'll get to that later, but this is a great takeaway. Let's get into it here. All right, it says Moses' father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard about everything that God had done for Moses and his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Now, one thing is, keep this in mind. Notice, Jethro hears of the great works of God. Now, remember I said that there are the nations, some of the nations around them, they all heard what God did to Egypt. This was not something that was done in the corner. Everyone heard about it. It says, now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken in Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back along with her two sons, one whom was named Gershom, because Moses said, I have been a foreigner in a foreign land. And the other one was Eliezer, because he said, the God of my father was my helper and delivered me from Pharaoh's sword. Now, this is interesting because notice we don't have, up until this point, there was nothing disclosed, right? That Moses had sent his wife back. We don't even know when he sent her back. Here's what we do know. She marries Moses, right? Because he's a handsome dude. He saves them. Wise, right? He's kind of a man's man. So for the next 40 years, Moses is chilling as the shepherd, right? He doesn't know what's going on with his life, and his life as he knew it in Egypt was over. Then God appears to Moses and says, you're going to go back and deliver Israel. But keep this in mind. We don't know what the spiritual state of Zipporah was, other than that when they set out on the way, remember there was this tussle, this angel tackles Moses, right, and almost kills him. And we don't even know why Zipporah did this or how she knew to do this, but she went and circumcised her sons. And then she throws the foreskins, right? Because that's what circumcision is. It is the tip of the male genital. She cuts it and throws it at Moses and says, you have blood, you're a husband of blood, or something like that. And that seemed to indicate where her attitude was towards God. Now, from that point, we don't hear from her. He goes to Moses. So we don't know if he sent her back at that moment. So now, remember, we're in the second month. Okay? And here, Moses brings her out and the two sons. Interesting, again, enough that Moses' two sons are kind of, they're not, they're Jewish, but not full Jewish, right? Half more, I think he was Moab. I think Midian was a part of Moab. And then, but we don't hear about Moses' two sons. That's interesting in itself. So anyway, he brings them out, and there's just kind of this family reunion. Odd to even say that. So, verse 5, Moses' father-in-law, along with Moses' wife and sons, came to him in the wilderness where he was camped at the mountain of God. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons. Kind of interesting phrase there. Now again, I don't know. We don't this family dynamic. Now there's going to be another issue with Moses later on. We're going to see with Moses and who he marries. It's going to involve an Ethiopian woman. But this is kind of interesting, this family dynamic here. That, and again, so since we don't know the ages of Moses' son, they have to be, depending on when she got pregnant, anywhere from their late 30s. So let's say as teenagers, assuming, to their late 30s at this time. Assuming they were grown men. Right? So what is their mindset? In other words, and clearly they are not the heir apparent. Clearly they're not the heir apparent. Right? And that's kind of strange. Anyway, that's kind of strange here. I say that because pretty much I've yet to see any ministry today where the sons are not the heir apparent. And that's regardless if they're godly or not either. They could be the devil themselves, and if they're the son, they're going to take over those ministries. But I do digress. Verse 7, so Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down, and then kissed them. They asked each other how they had been, and went into the tent. Moses recounted to his father-in-law all the Lord has done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and all the hardships that confronted them on the way, and how the Lord delivered them. Jethro rejoiced over all the good things the Lord had done for Israel, and when he rescued them from the let me read verse 9 again. Jethro rejoiced over all the good things the Lord had done for Israel when he rescued them from the power of the Egyptians. Verse 10, praise the Lord, Jethro exclaimed, who rescued you from Pharaoh and from the power of the Egyptians, snatched the people from the power of the Egyptians. Now this is amazing from Jethro. Remember, he is a Midian, right? So keep this in mind. He is not an Israelite. He is from a pagan land. And notice this phrase. Now, I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods because he did wonders when the Egyptians acted arrogantly against Israel. This is amazing right here, because right here, and this becomes also, we can add this to the testimony of faith. Jethro believed, remember, from Jethro's perspective, Moses is the son-in-law. For 40 years, he doesn't see any miraculous things in Moses. He doesn't. He doesn't see the burning bush in that respect. He later will tell them, but he hears about it. He hears about the works that Moses did, the works that God did. And notice he says, I know. Now notice that phrase, because remember, God said, I'm going to work these wonders in Israel that they will know that I am Yahweh. I'm going to work these signs and wonders in Israel that they may know that they are, that they may know that I am Yahweh. And here is a pagan man who doesn't even see the works, hears about them and says, I know that Yahweh is God above all the other gods. He was a pagan man. This is a statement of faith. This is amazing here. And one of the interesting things too about Israel, some of the people who even the Lord himself will say has the greatest faith would be those non-Jewish people. And Jethro here is saying, just hearing the works, he says, I know this, right? And it's kind of amazing because he knows this and above God's own people. Verse 11 again, I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods. Let's think about all the gods he worshiped. He said because he did the wonders when the Egyptians acted arrogantly against Israel. Now there are a lot of other people, nations around, who believed as Jethro did. We just don't have the account because that's not the focus. Verse 12, then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought in a burnt offering and sacrifice to God, not to any other pagan god. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in God's presence. So, now, one of the reasons why we're not really you're not seeing a lot about Moses' wife, because that's just not usually the focus is not being on there. It wouldn't be on there anyway. This is a male-dominated society, so that's unfortunately what that is. We don't even know if Moses even spent the night with her. It's just not the focus of the story. That's just the way it's going to be, Verse 13, the next day, Moses sat down to judge the people, and they stood around Moses from morning to evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw everything he was doing from them, he asked, what is this thing you're doing for the people? Why are you alone sitting as judge while all the people stand around you from morning until evening? And Moses replied to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. He says, and whenever they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I make a decision between one man and the other, and I teach them God's statutes and laws. Kind of interesting right here, since the law officially itself hasn't been given yet. But Jethro, he watches this. He says, Now from morning to evening, he says, why are you doing all of this, Moses, alone? In other words, what you're doing is good, but why are you doing this? In other words, you're teaching them, right? Now, one of the things that you're going to see that is also great is that, or I think is a takeaway for us. I mean, chapter 18 here, if you are a pastor, would-be pastor, chapter 18 is a great takeaway in that, notice what Jethro was saying. Well, first and foremost, what Moses was doing was good. How he was doing it was wrong. Notice he said, I teach them God's statutes and laws. That's the good thing. I teach them that. I don't teach them fancy preaching and philosophy and yada, 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 yada. I teach them God's statutes and laws. Verse 17, what you are doing is not good. Moses' father-in-law said to him, you will certainly wear out both yourself and these people who are with you, because the task is too heavy for you. You can't do it alone. Now, how will the people be wore out? Well, they got to stand there all day for one. But Moses certainly will burn out. Verse 19, now listen to me. I will give you some advice, and God be with you. You be the one to represent the people before God and bring their cases to them. Instruct them about the statutes and laws and teach them the way to live and what they must do. But you should select from all the people able men, God-fearing, trustworthy, and hating bribes. We're going to see this over and over again, hating bribes. In other words, money, bribes. Place them over the people as commanders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They should judge the people at all times. They could bring you every important case, but judge every minor case themselves. In this way, you will lighten your load, and they will bear it with you. And if you do this, and God so directs you, you'll be able to endure, and also all the people will be able to go home satisfied. So Moses listened to his father. Now that's even a miracle itself, right? A man of God listening, right? Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. So Moses chose able men from Israel and made them leaders over people as commanders, thousands, hundreds, and fifties, and tens. Notice that, even tens. They judged the people at all times. They would bring the hard cases to Moses, but they would judge every minor case themselves. Then Moses said goodbye to his father-in-law, and he journeyed to his own land. Now, at this point, we don't know if Moses' wife and his sons stayed with him yet. He just said his father left. We don't know if they stayed there. Not much is, again, beyond this is even said about about his wife. Again, weird, right? And the sons too. There's not much said about them. Like I say, certainly the sons could have been heir apparents, right? But they wasn't. And by the way, notice too, what is different than any other ministry, God is, of course, leading this. We don't know their spiritual state, but one of the things that is amazing too is go back to what he said about leading the people. Because a lot of churches today are centered around the pastor themselves. A lot of these mega churches, and especially the ones you see on television, radio, now probably social media, these are man-centered ministries. And what is kind of interesting about this is that these are as they grow, they are built around that one man. Okay, and they're the strategy behind that. And usually, when the pastor is ambitious enough, then as he starts his ministry, he may have a dynamic, right, speaking gifts, orator skills and stuff. And as his small church grows, he gets on the radio, and then he gets on television, and that really grows. And then he writes some books, and then of course he becomes world known, right? And he gets invitations, yada yada yada. But that's all on purpose. It's all strategy. And in some cases, these men, they're not true shepherds, because that's what they're doing. They're there to build their own ministries. But then other pastors, even if they are that, but they still they still build their ministries around themselves, right? And ultimately, what happens, let's say in the untimely event that they pass away, you see that churches, they go in shambles. The church is getting in a lot of shambles. And because he was never, there was nothing to pass on, because the church was built around him. So what Moses is saying right here is that, hey, you know what? As your church grow, one of the other things you may even say, some churches do what they call small groups. All right, break the church up small groups. Some pastors don't want to do that, because they don't want by the way, it's jealousy, but they don't want people outshining them in their ministries and stuff. But that's a whole other thing. But what is amazing about this is that the wisdom is that, hey, teach able people, grow up people, and teach people. Teach them the word. Then you commit that churches to able leaders. That's the takeaway there. And if you do that, he said, you'll lighten your load. And in Moses' cases, this was a government, and he said, bring judges up who can this. And by the way, this is actually, we're seeing as sort of the first kind of institution of judges that will later turn into kings. But the judges they were these rulers, and in some cases they would make circular trips and visits around Israel, and they do exactly what you see here. They would handle different cases with the cities. The design was to handle different cases with the cities. But notice what the one thing is: teach men of good character, who are not who won't take bribes, and there's no way you can avoid that. Okay, by the way, Israel itself won't even follow this in terms of a godly path. But the system is sound, and that's the point. The system of committing authority to able men who have shown themselves trustworthy and able. He says, and thus the top leaders will lighten the load, and that they could be about the business of leading all. All right, guys. Sound wisdom here. There's a lot in this chapter. Like I say, we don't know from this point on. We will not hear about his wife again from this point on. And as I said, we don't even know if she went back with her father. And then Moses' son, they're not even going to be mentioned. They're not going to be even a part of his ministry, and that's kind of odd and weird. All right, guys, look, chapter 19 in the next study. I'll see you then.